Hey, Rob.
How are you, Derrick?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Welcome back for your third time. You're already a three-time guest. You've broken all the records.
That's right. I'm going to keep it. I think it was like Steve Martin who had 11 or 13 appearances somewhere in there on SNL, and I want to be the Steve Martin of the Art of Product podcast.
You can put that on your bio somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. I'm updating my LinkedIn and Twitters as we speak.
Yes, awesome. Great. So, I read an interesting article that is sort of related to Level and the approach I'm taking for the business model from the company called Ghost. And the title of the article was, "After 5 years and $3 million, here's everything we've learned from building Ghost."
Got it. And Ghost is like Medium?
Yeah,
open source?
It's like an open source Medium alternative. So I think it has like a similar aesthetic, and it's basically a publishing platform that is, I don't know too much about it, but I'm assuming that it's a little bit more restrictive than something like WordPress that's very general purpose. Like I think this is designed to offer the Medium experience for someone who doesn't want to buy into that platform.
Got it. And they make money based on hosting.
Hosting.
All right.
Yep.
And so I find the title a little bit exaggerative. It's $3 million in total revenue since inception.
Yeah.
Their ARR annual run rate is just about $1 million, right?
Yep. $82K a month.
Which is still, for a bootstrap business, is still awesome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So some of their vital stats, they have all-time revenue, 3 million, 25,000 stars on GitHub because they're an open source project hosted on GitHub. They've had 173 releases, 512,000 sites using Ghost.
That's crazy. That's super cool.
Yeah. And they've got, users from Apple, Tinder, DuckDuckGo, Mozilla, Square. So a lot of corporate users.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Which is pretty cool. And then they have Runway. Just kidding. We've been profitable since year one. So that's the cool thing, is that they're using the, open source core product and they're bootstrapped, which is, I find that pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. That's an unusual, it's really hard to make that work, as we've talked about, because you tend to need the cash up front to get it going. Mm-hmm. Or not the cash up front, but the revenue, you need to get it from customers right away directly. And I imagine, they didn't launch and get Apple, Tinder, DuckDuckGo the first day or even the first year, I bet. They probably needed a few years to get the momentum and the brand name.
Yeah.
So during that time, they must have been selling to smaller players.
Yep.
I imagine if you're super small and you have developers, you're just going to open source it and throw it on your own AWS servers, right? Or pull the open source version. Mm-hmm. So, how did they find that in between before they got the big users?
Right. Well, some interesting additional properties of their businesses. They are organized as a nonprofit foundation, and their code is all licensed under MIT. So the most permissive open source licensing, and with a nonprofit way that they've structured their company, which is just fascinating. They have this kind of broken up into pieces in the article, and I pulled out a few of them that I felt were particularly relevant. And so we'll sort of cruise through some of these. So one of them is, they said, competing on convenience with centralized platforms was a mistake. So centralized platforms being like Medium, for example, where they talk about, when you're running a service like Medium and you don't have to worry about supporting people downloading the code and throwing it up on their own server, then you can easily do things like implement OAuth and single sign-on with Twitter, and you can, outsource your search of your database to some service like Algolia or whatever. And they're like, if you try to do that with open source, then your users have to, create a developer application on Twitter and set up their own, account with a search provider. It's very difficult to provide the same smooth experience
to the end users
who are setting up. Well, and so you either make it hard and potentially costly for someone to actually set up their own hosted version of your software, or you try to build all of that in-house when, you could outsource search very easily and just, roll that into your hosted platform. But if you have to offer search for all your open source users, then you need to set up your own Elasticsearch, I would imagine, and do all this, all this building of your own sort of plumbing.
Or you just don't offer those features until, you just don't offer them. I'm not saying you would do it without search, but there's some like OAuth or some where where you just say, not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's too complicated to build it, and we don't want a external dependency.
Yep. So I think their takeaway from this was like, they said they spent a very long time trying to compete on convenience and simplicity because they were getting feedback that indicated that that was, important to their users. And they said ultimately they just kind of had to ditch that and assume that they're going to cater it to a more powerful or more professional user who's willing to put in the work to set it up if they really want to host it.
And that's a hard thing to do as a product person, right? I mean, that's one of the balances is they were hearing this feedback, make it more flexible, make it more convenient. And yet they had to, make a hard decision to basically say, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not discouraged by that because I feel like, part of the value proposition you offer under this model, like people are paying them to host it so that they don't have to go jump through all those hoops to get it set up. And I actually don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and Level's probably going to be in a similar situation where once the product gains a certain amount of maturity, it will be a little bit of a pain to set up probably, especially if you're a company and you're trying to offer a reliable, platform for engaging in team communication. You're going to want search. You're going to want, redundancy of servers so that if one server goes down, you make sure your whole, team communication system doesn't go down. And these are all the things you have to worry about when you are basically hosting a SaaS application. And so I'm banking on the fact that this business will be viable because a majority of serious companies won't want to worry about having to set up all their own hosting.
And even I would totally agree with that. The killer thing is if you build a product that is different enough and people really want to use it, then even when we were 4 people, and I don't remember what our, MRR was at then, I'm guessing say 20 grand or 30 grand a month, I would have absolutely spent $50 a month, $100 a month to not have to pull a developer off.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It just didn't make any sense. So you don't have to be that big for it to not be worth your time, basically. Now that we were a product firm, if we were an agency, maybe, if we were renting out our time, you always have someone on, what do they call it? On the bench, or at the beach is actually, some of them call it that, but, even though you're still in the office. But, for those folks, they may want to implement it, but I bet, you'll just have to see, right?
Yeah.
You'll just have to see.
Yeah. There will be a certain, and like I talked to in my customer interview process, some people who were skeptical about, like they've been on the free plan for Slack and they were skeptical about paying for Level. And they're like, I don't know. I just, I feel like maybe I'd kick a few bucks over for this or that. I'm like, okay, if you're the type of customer who's so price sensitive that you don't want to pay for it, then go right ahead, and install it open source. And you may find that the build versus buy or self-host versus buy hosting, equation at some point no longer works out. And then there'll be a migration path for that.
Yep. And the fact that you are targeting developers means you can offer that.
Yeah.
Because if you were targeting, the whole world, or if you were targeting realtors or something, just to pull a ridiculous, you couldn't say, go do the open source version. Because they don't know what the heck that is. So.
Right. Cool. The second point was building a distributed team is both easier and harder than you might imagine. And,
I like this one.
We sort of experienced some of that at Drip, being partially remote, partially in office. Basically, they said, on the whole, it was a positive experience having a distributed team, but that the biggest challenges came from human problems, not business problems. So answering the questions of like, how do you know someone is in a bad mood? How do you deal with loneliness? How do you foster camaraderie? How do you achieve urgency since everyone is, essentially probably working on a flexible schedule that fits with their life? Like, it's good for asynchronous tasks, but when urgent things come up, how do you synchronize that? Yep. This resonated with me quite a bit. And I imagine Level will be a distributed team. I just think, especially when you're small and bootstrapped, like constraining yourself to a geography for finding talent is tough.
Because it's expensive is what it winds up being. Right? It's hard to find good people living in a major city who are willing to work for what you can afford.
Yeah. And I mean, we're in Minneapolis. I'll be here for a little while. And there is a moderately sized developer pool, not a huge developer pool. But then you look at the areas where there is a high concentration of developers and, you think Silicon Valley, Bay Area. And then, I mean, the salary competition, the perks and salary competition is just super intense out there. So I don't even think, trying to bootstrap in Silicon Valley would be insanity too.
Yeah. So. And even in Minneapolis where the cost of living is, I would guess, half maybe of what Silicon Valley is. Maybe, I don't know, a third is probably too extreme, but we have employers here like Target, Best Buy, I don't know, agencies and such who they pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
The salaries are, the quality of life here is great, you know, because you can make a lot of money as a developer and it's not so much to buy a house, but that makes it even, not even tougher, but it makes it difficult to bootstrap.
Right. Yeah.
And because you have to convince someone. I mean, that was always we work with Jason Selby, who was awesome at Drip, and he called it combat pay, where he said, because we were, at one point we were trying to hire somebody, in a role, and I don't remember what Target was paying him, but it was like, what in the world? Like, that is outrageous. Like, there's no chance we can match that. I cannot justify that pay rate. And he said, it's combat pay, man. It's putting up with the politics or he's probably in a crappy thing and he was going to leave and they kept upping his salary, And so that's not to throw Target under the bus or anything like that, but just the idea of, a Fortune 500 company like that, it's not going to be as fun to work for them as it will be to work on level, frankly. Right. But some people don't care about that, or some people don't, can't do it, or some people just don't see that. They don't realize how cool it is to work on a little startup, or maybe they really do need the money, which is
and it just depends on people's values. And there is a certain percentage of the developer pool that values working on cool tech and in a smaller bootstrapped environment in exchange for probably less pay than they would get in a more corporate environment. And it's just, there are people like that, but it's not 100% of them. It's just a subset. When there is sort of a competitive market with a lot of corporate entities around to sort of golden handcuff people a little bit. It's just makes it tricky to compete.
Yeah, and that's why as soon as you limit it to that subset, that's why it's really hard to stay in a locale and to hire local, because then it's like you've really cut your talent pool down. Yeah. But if you cut it down that way and then you go, basically 3 time zones either way is kind of how I like to think about it. That's where I'd prefer everyone work. Then you obviously have a lot more folks you can work with. Yeah.
And so I'm hoping, Level itself will help people maintain camaraderie similar to what Slack offers to a lot of companies right now. And I don't know, I've seen a lot of, fully remote teams do a few like retreats a year where they all get together. And I mean, there's cheaper and more expensive ways to run those. And so I think that would be something interesting to do once I actually have a team that's distributed.
Yeah.
I've seen that seem work.
I think that's about the best you can do. Yeah. And it's nowhere near working together in the same city. But I think that may be an unsolvable problem. Yeah. In terms of having the cohesion. Because I mean, their point of back to Ghost's article, how do you foster camaraderie? How do you ever get to know people outside of work when you never spend time with them outside of work? Right. And that was something that with each team that I built, the ones like, back in Fresno when it was 5 of us in an office, once we went remote, because now Nance is back there and Angie, we had the history and there's no miscommunication. I still feel like I know them well. And when I see them, we pick right back up, but we had that, whatever it was, year or 2 years of doing that together. I don't know how you do that, because chat, it can get you part of the way, but there's just no chance. So that's what I struggle with too, because if I were to ever build a company again, I would probably want it to be remote for exactly the reasons you said, but I just would struggle with that relationship piece of it. Yeah.
And I think we've seen kind of the challenges of having the hybrid model of partially remote, partially in person, and like being fully remote does democratize the communication. Like if there's communication happening, it's likely to be happening in a forum where like Slack, where everyone can sort of be on a level playing field. And I think it's just difficult. Like a lot of companies try to do it and you make your best effort, but it's just hard when you're in the same office. You're going to have conversations that people remote miss out on. So
that's a challenge.
Okay. The third point is open source development is largely more broken than ever. Ooh. And I know this is something you've been very respectfully skeptical of about the whole model of building open source. Is like, what happens when someone, thinks they're entitled to, you solving exactly what they want and they, flame you out on the internet for that.
Where they push code that you think is crap because you have a very high standard of code quality and code sensibility. So
So they said, I'm just going to read this quote directly from their article. Developers regularly show up on GitHub, rage at us for something like not supporting Postgres. And then we say, okay, so you're going to write and maintain Postgres support for Ghost? And they say, of course not. I don't have time for that. And then occasionally they'll go on Twitter and tell all their followers to give us hell.
Yep. So I guess it just happens. Yeah. I mean, that is I think that's going to happen, and it's tough when it does.
Yeah.
That's going to be the bummer.
I've seen my fair share of this happen, and this experience doesn't surprise me. There's a few ways you can approach open source. One is to say, like, this is an open source project and this is a product of the whole community, and the community basically shares ownership of it. And so this is the model we're adopting. And then another approach I feel like is it's more of a transparency element than like this is shared ownership by the whole community. And so like I want to build Level out in the open so that people can learn from the code that we're developing, and so that there are opportunities for people to build, interesting integrations with the code base. But I'm not necessarily approaching it from the perspective of like, now I want to outsource all my development to the open source community.
Right.
That's a careful balance to strike, because there are certainly people who feel like, if you are running an open source project, you have an obligation to give basically the community shared ownership of this project. And I think it doesn't have to be that way, but my guess is that a lot of that is setting expectations up front. And you can do some things on GitHub now with like issue templates and pull request templates that when someone tries to submit something, it shows them a blob of text that you write. And so maybe I can get out ahead of it a little bit with that, but I mean, I think it's still always a struggle. And
I think it will be, because the people who hold that opinion strongly, you were saying, where it's like, no, open source means by definition that everyone owns it and I can do everything with it. Those are going to be the most vocal people. They're going to tend to be the ones who fist pound and jump on Twitter. So there won't be a ton of them. There'll be just enough that they are irritating, from now and again. But that'll be, I mean, with any business you start, man, it's like at one point we're launching a small app that integrated heavily with Twitter. And then Twitter killed most of their ecosystem with the API.
Yeah.
I had Hittail, and you and I worked on that together, and Google kept accidentally stomping on it.
Yeah.
We built Drip and frickin' email blacklist. If I never see another one in my entire life, I never want to send email again.
Yeah.
You're always going to have something, and in this case, I think this may be your something that eventually, like, my list is I won't build anything on Twitter ever again. I'm not going to build anything Google can kill. I'm never going to send email again. My guess is at some point, 10 years down the line, you're not going to work on Level. You're going to, be done with it. And you will probably never do an open source again. I bet that will be the issue, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. I think it's all pros and cons. And I was listening to Justin Jackson and his business partner on their Build Your SaaS podcast, talking about specifically the decision to go transparent with their revenue numbers. And they were sort of running through pros and cons of transparency. I think they hit on a lot of good things. Like, some of the obvious ones are when you do things out in the open and transparent, it's a path for your competitors to steal your ideas or just, use that information against you one way or another. The flip side is, you're providing value to a community just by sharing numbers sort of just gives other people a case study to look at and to model themselves after. And I think there's a lot of benefits to promoting Elixir and Elm and GraphQL and the technologies I've chosen for this. And, I would like to have one of the most mature code bases, like a real world example that people can borrow patterns from. And I think there's a lot to be said for just giving back to the community. And the side benefit is building trust with that community and sort of building a brand, I guess. And I think it's hard to say like branding is a strategy, but I think that really is critical. I mean, David Cancel talks about it a lot with Drift, and I think it doesn't only apply to funded startups. I think, brand basically comes down to trust.
Oh yeah. Big time. And with the developer community is small. And you're talking about starting with a subset of a subset. It's like people who are interested in these technologies, right? Yeah. And at that point, brand just means it's trust, but it's like when I say Stripe or Square, you know who they are. Yeah. I don't have to say, oh yeah, it's that payments company that you can, do the POS. Oh yeah. At a certain point when you went to MicroConf, it flipped, and it was probably 2014 or 2015. People were just like, yeah, so what do you think about Drip? No one defined what Drip was. They all knew it. That was when I was like, boom, we have a brand with this group. Yeah. Right. And I do think you could, brand association can be positive when they trust you, or brand association can be negative if you screw them over, right?
Yeah.
So I don't. To me, it's a recognition within a group of people is how I think about it. And if you pick a small enough group of people to start with, which is what you're going to do, and everyone just starts saying level, and you don't have to say, well, what's that? Slack competitor, blah blah. But once level becomes just like a word that everybody uses, you have a small brand.
Yeah.
As you get bigger, Jason Lemkin, who runs SaaStr, he talks about having a mini brand, and he says you get it between $1 million. I think he said it was like when you hit $1 million or 1 to 2 million, you get what he calls a mini brand, which is just people start knowing you, even if they have never used you, even if they it's foggy as to the different, how is Drip different than MailChimp? But you said Drip in a lot of circles. I mean, I'm even thinking when I was at SaaStr, people were talking about it. It's like, I didn't realize everyone, they may not have used it. I mean, we weren't that big, but it was like, we were into 7 figures, but it wasn't like we're some tremendous thing. You start to get where everybody knows you. So I think that you have a very real potential to do that. And I think it's going to be useful for you in this community.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the most, successful ways to help drive word of mouth. And word of mouth is one of those things like you can't force it to happen. It just has to happen naturally. But it has, been cited as one of the biggest traction channels for a lot of companies. And a lot of times they're just like, I don't know, we just got it somehow.
Yep. Slack is one of them.
Yeah. Right? Slack is one of the biggest ones. So I think this is, potentially one of the ways to help foster that is through building brand and trust.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So I have one other topic before we wrap.
Yeah.
And it was something I've realized as I've been kind of unemployed or self-employed, as I'm now saying. But it's that I'm working really short days right now because I'm homeschooling my son in the afternoons just through the end of the school year for reasons that aren't that important. But I basically work from 9 to noon right now. I have a 3-hour workday, and I'm finding that I am ridiculously productive during that time. And I don't have to, typically I fight for motivation at times during the day, and I'm like, I got to caffeine up, I got to get the music playing loud or whatever. None of that is happening. Yeah. And I know specifically bootstrap startup founders and who work, 4 to 6 hour days.
Yeah.
And I think there's real, I'm starting to become a believer,
Yeah.
Traditionally, we have worked, I was trying to think, and even as we were building Drip, I think we worked about 7-hour days. Is that what you think?
I think so. I mean, I would like to get in, when we were coming into our Fresno office, I wasn't waking up super early. I was more following my body clock. So I would get in around 8:30 or 9, and I was generally trying to beat traffic. No one wants to drive in traffic. So I would take off around 3:30 or 4.
Yep.
And maybe do a little bit in the evening if it needed it,
Right.
But
and we would typically, if we were there, we'd typically eat lunch together.
Yeah.
So there was a break. When I'm at home, I don't tend to do that. So even and before Drip, I would my work hours tended to be, I'll say between 5 and 7 a day. I just have never felt like 8 hours is that productive for me.
Yeah.
So, but aside from, if you have a bunch of email and it just takes you 3 hours to get through it, that sucks. And I have been there, but I'm not there right now.
Yeah.
So I'm finding that I don't, even once I'm not homeschooling, I don't know that I want to go back to 6.
Yeah.
I may try to do 4 or 5. Now, one thing I'm doing a lot of writing these days, and you really can't do that for 6 hours. No, even professional writers like Stephen King or whatever, they do it in these 2 or 3 hour bursts because you just don't have any more.
Yeah.
Code is different.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that if I was coding, I used to be able to do I would do 7 or 8 hour days, and then I would do 3 or 4 hours at night. I would be tired, but it's what I needed to do to bootstrap, right?
Yeah.
You have the luxury, of course, not needing to do that, but I do think you can be pretty productive for a long period of time because there's not necessarily the same. There's creativity, but sometimes there's not, right?
Yeah. And I think what it actually is, because I think you're right. There are times when I can just start going and look up, and it's like, oh, it's 4:45, and I've been basically sitting here since I ate lunch. That does happen sometimes, but I've found, especially at early stages of building a product like I'm doing right now, when there's still a lot of unknowns. I'm spending a lot more mental energy, and sometimes I'll only write one small feature, a couple hundred lines of code that day.
Yep.
And I've been trying to convince myself that no, I actually I'll find myself saying oh, I didn't get much done today.
Yeah.
But no, I did. I'm just thinking through these hard problems. And once the path gets clearer and you have more of a foundation, then I feel like if you're just mostly implementing something that you've already decided on, then
that's the difference.
Then you can just be running, because we just all enjoy, it's like playing Legos, just snapping together code.
Totally. Yeah. The snap together phase is where I used to be, I won't speak for everyone, but I used to be able to do that for hours and hours and hours on end.
For sure.
And you're right. Whether it's the architecture or the big problem that you like, there's going to be, I need to whiteboard this. That stuff just takes your good glucose, man. And there's only so much you have in a day. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think, I continue to see podcasts and articles about, the fact that the 8-hour day, forcing that is just not, you're likely having a few hours in there where you're operating at 10% or 5%. And it's,
I know that 37 Signals during the summer, or I've heard during the summer, since the winters in Chicago suck so much, they do 4-day work weeks. And I was thinking to myself, I guess that's so people can go away on weekends or something, but I would much prefer, because that's 32 hours in essence. Yeah. I would much rather prefer, 6.25 hour work days, which I think, 5 of them personally. Yeah. I'd rather just have the shorter work days and work every day. But that's neither here nor there. I'm sure they have a reason for doing it. But I was kind of thinking, I wonder, maybe that's, if I were to ever do this again, would I try to do it with that and have that just be the thing that we have 6-hour work days? I don't know. Maybe it's just a dream. Right?
I think that's one of those things that I would love to just do differently. I think bucking traditional, wisdom that nope, got to be at least 40 hours. I just don't, I don't buy into that. So. And it's fun being, running your own company. That's one of the things you can experiment with.
I know.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Super fun.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Looking forward to the journey, man.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it.
Indeed. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, you bet. You can find the show notes for this episode at artofproductpodcast.com. And we'll see you next time.
Peace out.